Hi, my name is Luke, and welcome to this coding questions series. I am a software developer and technical writer, and I just thought that it would be great to do something like this, a coding question series to help any potential programming students and beginner developers. I know that it can be difficult to find some people to go through coding questions with, and I just thought that, going through a few of these questions would be a great idea. And just get my take on how I go through this process. So here we have a coding question, and it's set up using Codewars, which is the interface in this situation. And there are a number of different kinds. There's HackerRank, Geek for Geeks, and LeetCode. I just chose Codewars because it's just a great interface. It's easy to use. And I'll just be going through, questions of varying difficulty, probably start off with some easy ones and work my way up, depending on how this goes. And, eventually start doing some difficult questions, eventually start using LeetCode and doing some questions there. So yeah, so I thought that this would be a great start. Okay, so with Codewars, how they set up their user interface is they decided to break down their difficulty level using something called Q. So AQ would be the easiest questions and 1Q are the hardest questions. So this question, sum of positive, which is the title, is an AQ. It's one of the easiest questions that they have. And usually the interface is very similar to this. It gives you a question and then gives you a description of the problem, and we work our way from there. So I'm just going to click on here. It says train again because I've already done this question, but this would be where you would click. You click on that, and then it will show you like this. Okay, so you have your description of the problem on the left, as well as the output that's over here. And then you have your code editor on the right. And then on the bottom right are your test cases. Now, this is usually the format that you'll see coding question websites set up. This is usually how it will be if you were to do an interview as well. So being familiar with this is a good idea. Now, the two languages that I will be doing my coding questions in is Python and JavaScript. These are two of the very popular programming languages for coding questions, as well as just in general. And I thought that they would be a great way to start. Okay, so this question will be in Python. Now, let's take a look. Okay, so sum of positive is the title. And here's the description. You get an array of numbers. So in this case, this is Python. So instead of an array, it would be a list. You get an array of numbers, return the sum of all of the positive ones. Okay, so we're going to be tackling the positive ones, not the negative. So if you look at this example, it says, here's the list, 1, -4, 7, and 12. And if you look at what the function does, it's actually only targeting the positives here. 1 plus 7 plus 12 equals 20. And 20 is what it would return. Okay, so that would be the solution in this situation. Then it has a note, if there is nothing to sum, the sum is default to 0. Okay, so yeah, it's a pretty straightforward instructions. It's not that long. And we can go through it. Now, anytime you start a question, it's always a good idea to, first of all, think about what the question's asking. In this case, it's a pretty simple, straightforward one, so it's not too much. But sometimes, the questions are a little bit more complex. So the first thing to do is identify what is it that the problem is asking you to do, and what are the important points in the problem. Okay, so in this situation, the problem is pretty straightforward. It's asking us for an array or list of numbers that we get, and we want to return the sum of all the positive ones. Okay, so we could break this down. Now, when it comes to solving these coding questions, you start off with identifying the problem and what it's asking, and then you start trying to solve the problem using just logic. Don't actually start programming right off the bat. That's always not a good idea. The main reason why is because when you're in a hurry, you can miss things. And more importantly, for the more difficult questions, it's easy to run into issues because it's confusing. There's a lot of moving elements to these types of questions. So it's better to break down the question into logical steps that you can just run through and eventually solve. And doing this for just any type of programming issue is always a good idea. Break it down into manageable steps, manageable chunks that you can go through step by step and solve in that way is always a great idea. So that's what you would do here. And what I'm going to start writing is inline comments or just comments in general. And those comments will be my pseudocode, pseudo meaning fake. So my pseudocode being the instructions that I'm giving myself in terms of how I should be going through solving this problem. And that's what I'm going to do right now. So what are some things I need to do? Well, for instance, we know that we have to go through each element of the list that's going to be provided. Now, this test case is actually a great example. So here are some test cases. So each of these is a different test case that's going to be used to see whether or not my function runs. Now, with all coding questions, they're all simply functions, right? I mean, there is a question in there, there is a problem that we need to solve, but the way that we solve it, our solution will always be a function. It'll always be a function that needs to run and take in anything that we give it and utilize the solution to return the number that they're requesting or whatever that solution is, a string or whatever. In this situation, we can actually see the test case, what it is that it's giving us, and then what the result that we should be getting is. So here is the numbers that they're giving us, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the result. I'm not that great at math, ironically, but if you add all these up, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5, it should end up returning this as the result, 15. That would be the solution here. So that gives us some idea of what we should be looking for, okay? So for starters, we probably need something to hold the sum, right? Because that's what we need to return here, return the sum, okay? So we know that it's a number. So we need a holder to hold the sum of our result. Result is sum. The sum of all the numbers that we're adding together, all the positive numbers that we're adding together. That's what we're going to end up returning. But we need it to do that, because if we don't do that, if we don't have a holder, it's just going to run forever and it will not give us an actual answer, right? So holder to hold the sum is important, okay? And we know that, as I said before, that we need to go through each individual element inside of the list, okay? So we need to go through each element inside of the list, okay? Because we need to be checking. We need to check if the element is positive, and if it is positive, we need to add it to the next thing. So that's what we're going to do next. So go through each element inside of the list, right? And as we go through each element inside of the list, we will check to see if the number or integer is positive, okay? And if it is positive, then we will add it. If it is positive, we will add it to the sum / holder, because the holder is where we're holding the sum, right? And after we do that, after we do all of that, we will return the holder, which is the sum, okay? A lot of coding, just in general, the reason why it's confusing is because of all the references that we're doing. We're always referencing to something. Something always represents something. And it's always just keeping track of where all of these link up to. That's where most of the programming's confusion happens. And so as long as you can keep track of where it's going, it's not as confusing, and it is more easier to keep track of. So if you notice, what I did here is I've made steps, each individual step of what I'm going to do, right? And I didn't like write it down as in like, oh yeah, I'm going to go step 1, step 2, I didn't do it like that. I was just thinking out loud, oh, what is it that I'm going to do? And I just wrote down every time it was a single action or task that I needed to do. I just made sure to write it down so I don't forget. That's why I did this, right? So it's just easier to keep track of. So let's go through them. Let's go through them one by one. So first of all, I need a holder to hold the sum, okay? So what is a holder in programming? A variable, okay? So I just need a variable. Let's call it some num, just to make it easy to remember. Yeah, let's go with some num, because that's what it was. So sum underscore num, right? And we know that it's an integer because all the list, it says you get an array of numbers. So it's an integer. So let's start off with 0. We're starting off with 0 instead of like if it was a string, an empty string. We're starting off with a number because that's what it's asking for. So we did that. So the next step is to go through each element inside of the list. Now, how do you do that? You use a loop. Okay, so you, in this situation, probably a for loop will take care of this. Okay, so what is a loop? A loop is when you are looping through each element of whatever, whether it's a string, a list, or numbers. That's what a loop is for. It goes through each individual element. Now I'm using the word element here, but I know that there's probably some syntax mistake that I'm making. I apologize. This is what happens when you're going through multiple languages, is that you start messing up syntax. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop a comment. I will be happy to answer any questions that you have there. Okay, so yeah, so I apologize again if the syntax is wrong. So yeah, so anyway, I'm going to go through each element inside of the list using a for loop. So how do I write a for loop? Well, it's very simple. You just put for, and then you put the variable of whatever it is that element is going to be. So each element that it's going to be, it will be encapsulated. Encapsulated is not the right word here, but you will put it within this variable. So in this case, just to make it easy to understand, I'm putting it as x, like just like regular algebra, right? So for x in, so where is the loop running? What is it running on? Well, we want it to run on whatever list that we're receiving, right? So where are these lists coming from? Well, they're going to be probably within these parameters. Like if I was to copy and paste this list of numbers, I totally could into this parameter and this function would run properly, but I want this to run for any list that I'm given. So in this case, that variable, that parameter is being represented by the ARR. So that's what I need to go through in my loop. So I'm going to just type in ARR here. So the X represents the element that I'm on at that moment. And as I go on to the next element, to the next element, to the next element, that's what the X will represent for each of those moments. Okay. So until, I've run out of elements within the list. Okay. So for X and R, that's why that's set up like that. Now that I've gone through each element inside of the list, what am I doing? I am checking to see if the number is positive. Okay. So there's a clue there. How do you check if something is positive? Well, I can use an if statement. So an if statement is when you check exactly, when you do exactly that, when you're checking if this is this, then do this type of situation. So if X, so as I mentioned, the X is the variable for each element. If X is positive, is greater than 0, because that's how you know it's positive, because it's greater than 0. If X is greater than 0, what should we do? Well, I've now finished this step and then this step, check to see if the number is positive. Okay, if it is positive, then what should we do? We should add it to the sum/holder. So we know that this is the sum/holder, the variable. So how do we add it? Well, we could just do this. Plus equals x. Okay. It doesn't like my sum/num. I guess it just doesn't like that name. Maybe I should just go with num like that. Huh. I think it's, well, yeah, that's what it is. It's actually, there was no issue with my sum/num. It was more placement. With Python, placement is actually, indentations is actually really important. So that's the reason why that was happening. But yeah, so num plus equals x. So what am I saying here? I'm saying that if it is greater than 0, add it to whatever is inside of the variable num. So currently there's nothing inside it, it's 0. So what you would get is whatever the number that's going in here is. So here the example is 1, so it would just be 1 plus 0. So what's 1 plus 0? 1. So that means that initially it would be the sum of 1 and then onward, okay? So that's what num plus equals x represents here. Okay, so if it is positive, we will add it to the sum/holder. And what is the last thing I need to do? Well, I need to return the holder, okay? I don't return anything else because, again, I'm trying to return the sum. And where is my sum? It's right here. Okay, so I'm going to return num. Okay, so just to make sure I'm doing all of the steps, I'm going to just go through them. So return the holder, return num. If it is positive, we'll add it to the sum slash holder. That's what I'm doing here. Check to see if the number is positive. That's what I'm doing here. And go through each element inside of the list. And that's what this for loop is doing. And the ARR is the list. And then have a holder to hold the sum. That's what this is. Okay, so it seems like pretty much I've taken care of everything on my list. And this is actually one of the main reasons. I'm sorry that I'm saying list and then this again, but this is the reasons why we make these steps, is so that it gives us a blueprint that we can easily follow. And we don't have to be like thinking in our heads, oh, maybe I should do this, maybe I should do that. Well, I've already gone through that within the pseudocode, so I don't need to do it again while I'm coding, which makes it a lot easier to get through the coding process because my mind is already focused on all of the coding, like remembering methods, remembering the different elements of my programming language, which in this case is Python. So I can just focus on that and not have to focus on the logic part of it because I already handled it. Now you can see, right? So now why don't we try testing this out, okay? Tests are always a great idea because they can also potentially tell you what's wrong, or maybe you want to check, oh, if this is working or not. And that's why tests can be really useful too. But let's see if this one works. Okay, it's sending a request and it passes. There is no issues. Says that this is the amount of time that it took for it to run. It passed all of the test cases, in which case this was 5. And now if I was to attempt it, so this will run through all of the tests. It runs through all of them and passes all 45. So before it was 5 tests, but this time it's 45 tests, and it passes all of them. Okay, so so great. I guess this has solved the issue. Now, no matter what list that we put in here, it should run properly and give you the sum. Okay, and that was the goal here. And so I hope that this helped you better understand what this process is like when it comes to these types of coding questions. I'll be going through this process um, for any future questions. And again, if you have any issues or anything you would like to talk about, feel free to drop a comment and I will be happy to discuss it. So anyway, thank you for tuning into this video. I hopefully will continue to make more. And thank you, and I look forward to seeing you again. Bye.